This is the Entrepreneurs United podcast with your hosts, John St. Pierre and Rich Hoffmann.
Hey, entrepreneurs, John and I today are going to talk a little bit about the transition curve and how we can feel ups and downs in our business. And what I want to know, John, just to kick the conversation off, is we know with the transition curve, when you're up really high, especially in the beginning of owning your business, it can be as a result of uninformed optimism. You don't really know, but you're just excited to be in it, right? And then you go down to informed pessimism, and you go ultimately down to crisis of meaning. Crisis of meaning is where it's, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if I belong here. I don't know if I have the right skill. And there can be some imposter syndrome that even happens there. So my question for you, John, in this, some people have said this is a challenging economic environment, and it is for some businesses. If there's an entrepreneur who you're coaching, who's feeling, not only is this a challenging environment, but I'm really questioning myself. Is this for me? How would someone know, oh, this is just a challenging environment, you should push through and set small steps and have a game plan? Or how would someone know, you know what? I actually think this isn't for me. I think I should be thinking about what my next step is outside of doing this. How would you advise somebody be able to know the difference?
Rich, I love the topic. I love the question. I think you and I spent a lot of time evaluating this transition learning curve in our younger years, and I think it helped us just understanding. So if you don't understand fully the components of this model, it's so important to understand the model in and of itself, and that everything goes in cycles. The economy goes in cycles. Our lives go in different cycles or stages of our lives, and so does the transition learning curve. And it goes in, you can go through the transition learning curve on a task, let alone a job, let alone a relationship, let alone anything you go in your life. You have to go through these cycles. And I think from my story, one of the things I talk a lot about today is this concept of patient ambition, and how a lot of us lack the patience. So when we get to a crisis of meaning or a crisis of intervention in that learning curve, we kind of, maybe this isn't for me, and we bow out way too quick. And there's not a company that exists today that did not go through this stage, that maybe didn't even go through this stage in its first week, month, year of business, that they're in this area going, maybe this isn't the right business. Maybe this isn't the right pricing model. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe, but you have to persevere through. Now, I still believe there's a time maybe where you've exhausted all those options and this isn't the right thing. But I also believe, Rich, that many people will go through cycles where uninformed optimism, uninformed pessimism, crisis of meaning. Okay, I'm going to change jobs. Okay, uninformed optimism, uninformed pessimism, crisis of meaning. Okay, I'm going to go change jobs. And they never cross to the other side of informed pessimism, where they really know what's going on, but now they know how to handle it. Or informed optimism, where, you know what, my curve is flattening because I know how to handle this task, and I know what's good about it. I know what's not so good about it, but I got it. And so for me, it's perseverance. And if you haven't tried to persevere through it, that's where I work with my clients on, is persevering through that crisis of meaning, that crisis of intervention, where, by the way, is probably one of the most fulfilling things I think you and I can do as coaches, is help somebody that's in the bottom of that curve persevere to the other side. And I've had a few of those experiences, Rich. It's been over the top enlightening for me, and make me, the reward that I feel in helping an entrepreneur be in the crisis of meaning where they're at the point of giving up. And it saves their business or themselves and their mental health and everything. It's so critical. So I always talk about patient ambition, perseverance. What do we need to do to get to the other side of this curve is really where I focus a lot of my attention. Now, how we do that, I think there's a lot of things that you and I can talk about in that. And I'd love to ask you, maybe back to the same question, because you asked me, how do you handle it? And what's your viewpoint on that crisis of meaning phase and how to persevere to the other side?
I didn't have an answer when I asked you the question. And I was thinking of your answer and thinking of, oh, I bet John's going to toss this back to me. I think there's a difference between somebody's been in the business for a year or two and somebody's been in the business for 20 years. And that person is a coaching client of ours who comes in and says, I don't think this is for me. I feel like the one who's been in it for 20 years, who knows what the challenges of the business are, and they just feel like their heart's not in it anymore. That's very different than somebody who's a first or second year in business that's experiencing their third cash flow crunch and feels like it's too difficult to continue on. So one of the things I think I look at, John, is what is their experience in the business? I always want to check in and ask, tell me what's going on. Why do you feel that way? And then you have some of your typical coaching questions. What options have you considered? And what would be the easiest thing to do next? What would be the most impactful thing to do next? And just over the course of conversation, a lot of entrepreneurs find some comfort in just talking it out. Because the idea of talking it out with their leadership team or employees or their spouse or their neighbor, like it's very different. Like the spouse and the neighbor may not totally understand what's going on in business. The leadership team or the employees, like there's some consequences to having conversations like these with them. And I find using a coach as a neutral party where you and I, John, go, I'm not sure I care whether you continue the business or not. I want you to do what's right for you. And I want to help you discover what's right for you. I don't know what's right for you. I'm not telling you I know what's right for you, but I do know I can help you discover what's right for you. And talking about a vision and where ultimately do you want to take this? And why did you get in it to begin with? And ultimately that conversation leads to what's the next step? Because it can feel very overwhelming, whether you've been a year or two in business or 20, and you still ride the curve. And sometimes when you're riding the curve 20 years in, it's harder to get out of it because you know where all the bodies are buried in that business.
One thing I see a lot, Rich, though, and maybe you've experienced this as well, are false positives where they're positive that they're exhausted. They want to move on from whatever that task or role or company or startup or whatever it may be, right? But they're just fatigued. And maybe they're fatigued because they don't have the right systems in their business. Maybe they're fatigued because they didn't create the right culture of entrepreneurship in their company where other people are taking on a task that has fatigued them after 20 years. Maybe they put themselves in a business where they're operating a business as opposed to owning a business. There could be a lot of reasons why they're fatigued. And I find that to be a true thing when I go to someone's in the crisis of meaning. If they want to check out of that process for whatever reason, it's usually they're just fatigued. They don't have this, what's in place that they intended to have in place. And I think that's where a coach can really help them put that in place. And here's one thing I do with the transition crew. I don't know if you did a lot of this, but when I was hiring direct employees, and I don't really hire direct employees as much anymore, but when I did, one of the things I did at the end of the interview process, before they started, or the first day they started when we were having our one-on-one, is I actually would draw this learning curve. And I'd say, you're right here right now. This is your first day at the company. You don't know where you're sitting yet. You don't know what's going on, but you're really excited to be here. And they're like, yeah, absolutely. I can't wait. And I was like, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in your seat and you're going to talk to Sally and Jim on the left and the right of you. And you're going to realize your chair isn't as comfy as you thought it was going to be. And we didn't provide you with pencils. And it's not as exciting as you thought yesterday when you first started because you don't have all the tools you needed. Or maybe you have to be on Google and you're used to Microsoft. Or there's going to be some things you don't really like and you're going to question it. No big deal. And then you're going to get down here where now you maybe didn't succeed in your first project, or maybe you haven't made all the sales that your quota says you're going to make or whatever. Now you're starting to question everything. You're going to get to this point at some point in your life cycle at this company that you're working. When this happens, come talk to me. And I'll bring out this piece of paper on my desk and put it on the table and go, remember when I told you to be here? That's where you are. And I'll help you through it. And you wouldn't imagine how many times that conversation would happen. They would forget about it. They would just forget about it. And 6 months, a year and a half later, they'd come in my office, go, I don't know if this is right for me. And I'd bring out the piece of paper and put it on the table. And I said, remember this? And I'd be like, okay, let's work through it. And give this a chance before you give up on yourself, give up on the role, give up on this. So I found as an entrepreneur, me being trained on the transition learning curve, like we're talking about today, and then training my team on what it is, also helped me recognize when I was in it more often and could walk myself through what am I talking to my team about as well. So just having full knowledge and training your whole team on this transition learning curve could really help because as an entrepreneur, you may go through these cycles, of course, like you just mentioned, but if you have a team of 10 or 50 or 100 people, you got at times 10 or 50 or 100 people that are going through this transition learning curve all over your business. And the more you know how to navigate people through it, not just yourself, I find that to be a really strong tool.
My parents were married for 53 years before my mother unfortunately passed away. And do you remember when I asked my dad, what's the key? And this is at the point where they were 50 years married. I said, what's the key to a 50-year marriage? Do you remember? I swear I told you this.
I think you did. And as a matter of fact, I may have actually been part of a conversation with you where that question was asked, but I don't recall the answer. No.
So the typical answer is, don't go to bed angry. The answer is communication. The typical answer, like his answer, one word, procrastination.
I do remember you telling me that.
What do you mean the key to a long marriage is procrastination? And it was like, anytime you're thinking that the relationship is troubled, just procrastinate on making a decision about that. And if you do that enough and you just stay married, and you'll figure out a way to be happy. You will. Just procrastinate on the alternative decision. And when we are talking about the transition curve and the point in crisis of meaning where an entrepreneur is, I think there's real value in procrastinate. It's a funny way to say pause. Pause. How many decisions have you made in your life when you've been at the bottom of the transition curve and you thought, that was a great decision I made when I was really down? Not many. Like, you should never make to your point, you've talked about 1-door and 2-door decisions. You don't make a 1-door decision when you're at the bottom of the transition curve. A decision that you can't reverse, you don't do that when you're feeling really down. So when you're feeling really down, the key is pause. Don't make a 1-door decision when you're down like that. You're going to come back up. You're going to have your emotions more neutralized, be able to think more logically, more critically. And maybe it's a good decision for you to stop in that business. Maybe it's not. But with all the emotion of being in crisis of meaning is not the right time to call that shot.
I love it, Rich. And I didn't connect any of this until I'm listening to you. But the first thing I responded to when you asked me the question of how I work with entrepreneurs was patient ambition.
Yes.
And patience and procrastination play hand in hand, right? Just be patient. You don't have to make a decision right now. Procrastinate that decision. Just hold on. And by the way, even if you're not in the depths of the learning curve, if you have a big decision to make, don't make a knee-jerk reaction. You evaluate it properly. Have patience. Procrastinate. Hold on a second. Hold on to that decision for 2 or 3 days before you make it. Even if you're not in the bottom of the learning curve, it's a good practice to have anyway. Is to exercise patience and procrastination sometimes to your benefit. There's a lot of times we have to make quick decisions. That's fine. But on big, major decisions, especially if they're life decisions, you have to have that level of in-depth analysis and time and thought, because you never want to go into that one door and realize, oops, I can't get
I
out.
also find if there's a pain point big enough to avoid, that someone selling their business or leaving their business is very motivating. And sometimes it should be. For example, if there's enough time put into the business that family relationships have been ignored for way too long, and there's a marriage at risk, there are a lot of people that go, I'm not willing to give my marriage up for the business.
Yeah.
And at that point, it doesn't mean sell the business. It may mean delegate and automate some stuff or tailor back what's happening. But there are definite changes that need to be made. Same thing happens with health. Somebody says, oh, I've been out eating junk food for way too long, and now I weigh too much. Now I have diabetes. Now I have bad knees. Now I have a bad back. I can't do this anymore. That's a great reason to make a change. But we don't want to wait for that. We don't want to wait for those pain points to come up. You and I have often talked about, John, that if we ignore other areas of our life long enough, they are going to come up in painful ways and force us in horribly painful ways to have to focus on them. So if you don't focus on your health long enough, something's going to happen that's going to make you focus on it and it won't be comfortable. You don't focus on the family long enough. Eventually the kids say, I don't know who dad is anymore. Or the spouse says, I'm not sure who you are. I'm not connecting with you. So we want to not wait for these painful things to come up to have to make those adjusting decisions. We would much rather make a tough decision because something happened that was unforeseen in the business than coming out of left field in our personal lives that's really fallen apart.
Rich, it kind of, as you're saying that too, I'm going to have a hard time describing this. I haven't really thought through it, but bear with me. If you have a major situation that happens today, whatever that may be, that puts you down into the depths of crisis of meaning for whatever reason, that's a big moment for June 3rd, 2025, as we're recording this. July 3rd. Big moment. So if I looked at your scale of stress, or I looked at whatever, it'd be like a big up. You started the day real high and bang, you're down here. And maybe you come back up because it's July 4th festivities and you have this big swing in your day, right? But look at your 30-year life and go back to that graph, and July 3rd is not going to look that big anymore, potentially. Now, maybe it does because it could have been a major event. But when you look at it in a grand scheme of things, your life is a little more flat than that July 3rd day where you had this major crisis that happened in your business. And so having that long-term view horizon plays into your parents' point of procrastination, plays into patient ambition, plays into as bad as you think it is right now, it's probably not as bad as you're feeling right now. And over the grand scheme of things is going to feel maybe even insignificant. The amount of times that we worry and stress over things a year from now, we'll forget about, let alone 30 years from now, we won't even remember. And so this idea, whether your employees are going through this, or you as an entrepreneur are going through this, or you and I are going through this, Rich, you need to have a long-term horizon and know what your goals are. And I'll give you a really good example. If you're an entrepreneur and you're in the crisis of meaning, this is what I would say with somebody. How long have you been in this business? Oh, I've been in this business for 5 years, but I don't know if this is the right business. I keep banging my head against the wall. Okay, got it. I understand. So do you still want to be an entrepreneur? Or have you decided that you want to go get a job and go, no, I still want to be an entrepreneur? Okay. So you've been working 5 years to get your company to this point, and you're going to just leave it there and go start a new business where you're going to, the grass isn't greener, buddy. Uninformed optimism all over again. 5 years into that business, you're going, this isn't the right business for me. And that's where perseverance and sticking it through is that important. It could be right. That entrepreneur wanted to become a musician and this wasn't their passion anymore and they're just not happy. That's the right decision for them. But you need to know what you're looking for in the long term. That's why having a long-term plan in my mind plays into this piece, that it's hard for me to coach an entrepreneur on this decision on what they should do if I don't know what they're ultimately trying to achieve. But I do know if they're ultimately trying to achieve success as an entrepreneur, just giving up on a business because you're having a bad week isn't the right solution, as an example. So there's a lot of factors that play into it, but it all comes back to this full circle on me, Rich. Same thing with your employees. If an employee comes to work with you and as things aren't going right, they're going to just go leave your job to go start somewhere else because the grass can be green over there and informed optimism on the other side. So you have to give everybody you work with a long-term horizon, including ourselves, including the people we work with, to have that patience to work through issues and resolve them as you move forward.
The visual I got as you were talking is when you look at a chart for the Dow Jones or for any particular stock, and you look on it for the day, and it looks just up and down, and it's like a roller coaster. And then you look at it for the week, it's a little bit more flat. You look at it for the month, you look at it for the year, you look at it 3 years, you look at it lifetime. And the question, is it generally trending up? Because if it's generally trending up, there's no guarantee that past performance is going to happen in the future. But if it's generally trending up over the course of the lifetime of that business, it's probably going to continue to generally trend up, despite the day-to-day volatility that it may feel like today. Zoom out and look at the 3-year, look at the lifetime, and look at how it's actually a little more flat than what it feels right now. It's going to be okay.
Rich, what an incredible visual you just gave, because when you do look at stocks, If you just look at how they performed this week and made a decision whether or not you want to invest in that stock or not, you're making a big mistake. But if you look back 30 years, whether they were flat or not in their first year or down or not in their second year is irrelevant if they are generally trending up. So that's a great point. And that goes to play. Like, what if you're trending down? What if your business for the last 3 or 5, 10 years has been trending down? What are you doing about it? And maybe there is genuine concern and genuine conversation that needs to be happening about that particular business or that industry or what that business does or should it pivot or what needs to happen to revive that and put it in the right direction. Because I have seen those as well, where over a long horizon, that business is trending down and some action needs to be taken. And that's where I think coaches like you, myself, and many others can come into play and really try and help revive that entrepreneur in that business, pivot the business. But going to start another business may not be the solution still. The same thing applies to an employee that maybe last couple of years, they are trending down. They're selling less, they're less motivated, they're less that, and they need that motivation, that inspiration from mentorship or leadership to put them in the right direction, put them in the right seat. And I think there's a lot of people, take any company. If you're listening to this right now and you own a company or run a company or lead a company, there are some people on your team that are in the crisis of meaning. Do you know they're there? Do you care? Do you ask them about it? Do you ask them where they are? Do you try and help them through it? Are you a manager, a leader, or a mentor? Going back to what Ted Moss said, right? And the more you can be a mentor to your team and educate them on this transition learning curve, the better mentor and leader you can be and help your people through those crisis moments and help them get to the informed optimism stage where your company can also flourish alongside.
John, you bring up a great point on when you said you show people that. And then you brought it in just now to, hey, as an entrepreneur, are you asking people about it? I would highly recommend, if you haven't looked up, I mean, you could go to Google, you can get John's book, look up that transition curve. Explain that to your employees. Use a common language then. So then you can ask them, hey, where are you at on the transition curve? Sometimes I ask that of coaching clients of mine who we have that common language, and I could just tell things are off. And I'll just ask, hey, where are you at on the transition curve? And they'll say, pretty low, not quite crisis of meaning. And in like 15 seconds, I know exactly where they are because we have that as common language. I think as entrepreneurs, we want that with our employees is a fast check-in to know where they are on that transition curve. And then that translates to, as a coach, one of the challenges as a coach, and I'm sure you've experienced it, John, is as a coach, we actually want to take a little bit of the opposite approach of where the person is who we're coaching.
Yep.
So somebody's really low on the transition curve. As a coach, you want to come in a little higher. It's not as bad as you think. There's an easy next step. Somebody's really high on the transition curve. We just hit goals. We're crushing it. You want to go to, I think you could actually do more. So you're constantly, as a coach, leveling out that transition curve by people who are high. You want to get them the higher achievement, but eventually they're going to miss some expectation. Then you're going to be higher than what they are. And it actually, just in all transparency, it's an exhausting part of coaching, is not always being able to be on par with people. When the people who we're leading are down, we can't be really down. Now, that doesn't mean when they're up, don't celebrate successes. But when they're up, celebrate the success and put out another challenge. So you brought up a great point on this communication with employees, and I just wanted to expand on that a bit.
Yeah, great example again to even sports coaches. I know a lot of great professional sports coaches, amateur sports coaches that their team just got licked 8-0. Going in the locker room and yelling at them because they didn't work hard enough is not what you need to do in that moment. Not at all. You got to go in and support them and love them, be with them and know that they're in pain. But the team just won 8-0 and they're making jokes about the other team and how much they sucked. You walk in the locker room and you rip them another one, right? For not being professional in sports and taking things for granted. So it's just that psychology game that all the intent and purpose is to try and flatten that line a little bit and regulate the emotions. So you never get too high, you never get too low, you can be a little more stable. And that stability will be shown to your team, will be shown to your family, will be shown to other entrepreneurs. And that's really the stability that you're looking for to just, you said it right, Rich, just keep going up and to the right, slowly and steady over the course of your entrepreneurial life and your life.
It's never as bad as you think, and it's never as good as you think. It's always a little more towards the baseline.